Thank you, musicians. Pick out your Bible, and I think we want to land in Romans chapter 8. There's a little outline in your bulletin that you can follow along with if you like. PowerPoint stuff up behind me. We're coming to the end of our little mini-series on the healthy soul, or a healthy soul. And we've talked about two really critical things. How do I see myself? Do I see myself through the eyes and lens of what God says I am? Or do I see myself through the people around me and all the stuff, the things I've accomplished, the things I've done in my life, etc., my gifts and talents? A healthy person sees themselves through the eyes of God and embraces how God made them and maximizes their talents for God's glory. The second thing we talked about was a healthy soul is a person who knows the importance of forgiveness. And everybody gets hurt in life, sometimes physically, oftentimes emotionally, sometimes spiritually. But a healthy soul understands the importance of forgiving people around you. It's impossible to walk through life and not have to ask forgiveness and to forgive other people who ask for it from you. Those were our topics the last 2 weeks. Today is our third and our final one, a healthy soul. And I toyed with all kinds of ideas. This one keeps landing on me. I've actually spoken this subject probably 6 or 8, maybe even a dozen times, and it never comes out the same. I don't repeat what I said before. I was very excited about preaching on grace before. I am right now. It's just a topic that's just so deep in our walk with Christ and in the Word of God. And so we're going to walk through the topic of grace this morning and say this about a healthy soul. A healthy soul has a growing understanding of grace, and I'm absolutely there. This is something that just kind of grows on me. People have said, that's not very gracious. Bingo, and I take a half step back, like, okay. Does that mean that I need to grow in this area? And they are finding more ways to be gracious to those around them. Isn't that the measure of our grace? And John says in John 1, verse 17, Jesus was full of grace and truth. We sometimes find one side or the other, overly gracious to people, and truth doesn't matter, or we're so stuck on truth that grace is really scarce. So finding, choose that perfect balance of grace and truth. And so we grow in that area, and we growing in gratefulness and graciousness defines their relationship more and more. The most gracious people I've ever met are grateful for whatever they have in life. There are people who think that life owes them more, and they're very ungrateful. It can be a little irritating at times. So grace is my topic this morning, our topic. I want to talk about grace, and I've never done it before, but it just dawned on me this past week. I want to talk about grace up here, in our head, and grace in our heart. The lion's share of the message is grace up here because the Word of God speaks it constantly, especially in the Old Testament. So then grace, as it touches our heart, because I can understand grace in my head in many different ways, but have I ever truly experienced it in my heart? That's where I experienced it. So I want to talk about grace in those two areas. Grace in our head and then grace in our heart. So head grace and heart grace are the 2 points in our text today. But let me start by asking a couple of questions. How does grace manifest itself in life for you? I can think of a gracious police officer who kind of let me go. I was speeding, he just kind of gave me some grace and off I went. And I forget about it just as quick as it happens, generally speaking. I can think about, I refereed for 17 years, and then I passed out some grace along the way. No particular reason. Someone just, okay, you got away with that. Don't do it again, et cetera, et cetera. So we think about grace just letting people kind of slide a little bit, right? In the end, if they do the wrong thing, and it's just blatant, no more grace, we're out here. How does grace make itself known in my relationships? How does God's grace present itself from my life into the world that I influence? There are people who are naturally gracious. It just kind of comes out of them because that's just their bent. But how does a believer who's, say, started on the true side, manifest grace around them? How does that influence actually come out of their life? I'm not going to answer all these questions, but it just crosses my mind that we ought to ask those questions to discover what grace looks like. Would others say that I am gracious? I don't really want someone to answer that question for me right now. No, Mark's not gracious at all. He's only gracious to certain people. Would others say my house is a gracious place to visit? Would guests see our church as gracious? Are we truly gracious to each other? Is my graciousness real? Those things cross my mind. So let's start with head grace, all right? John 1:17, he was full of grace and truth. Here's something I want to share, a concept from the Old Testament. I'm going to walk through this in a minute. The Old Testament seeds grace, as it were. It's seeded there, but it actually flowers in the New Testament. So that's how I see the Old Testament. Paul uses the term grace way more than any other biblical author. In his 13 letters, he uses it 101 times. And it's used 156 times in the New Testament complete. So he really likes this word. He's the apostle who just preaches grace over and over. As a matter of fact, his ministry was unique in that regard. Paul made it clear that his ministry was completely different from the ministry of the other 12. He, like an architect, had laid a new foundation, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 10, and declared he was the first of the prototype for a pattern of ministering grace, as it were, a new message in ministry. The word pattern comes from a word that means fingerprints. He left the fingerprints of God's grace everywhere that he went. He summarizes in 1 Timothy chapter 1, no one has received more grace than me because I was such a wretch when I was sick. He was battling the church. He was against the church. He was putting people in prison because he didn't want them to advance, and God redeemed him. Literally snatched him out of the fire. Grace mattered to Paul, and he leads us as he considered himself completely unworthy. But grace did not seed the New Testament. Grace flowered in the New Testament. Grace is seeded in the Old Testament. So I want to talk about Old Testament grace for a few minutes. In the Old Testament, where does grace show up first in the Old Testament? Where? No. What does that little verse say? And Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's where my mind went to instantly. That's the first time in the Old Testament where the word grace comes through. It says favor in some translations, but the King James says grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now that might lead us to believe that there was something really cool about Noah that made God like him. The truth of the matter is that's just not true about any of us. A better translation, as I understand it, is, and Noah found the grace that's in God's eyes. See the slight difference? Because the person who manifests grace perfectly is God. And there's nothing inside of me that guy goes, oh, I should be really nice to that guy. He's a really sweetheart character, or she's a sweetheart doll. I should just treat them extra special. That has never occurred to God. We're all a bunch of ingrates and difficult people to hang with. And the Old Testament completely manifests that. You're thinking about, now that I'm a child of God, I'm easy to get along with, right? That's not always true. Genesis 6, verse 8, which says, and Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It's the first place in the Old Testament where grace pops up. That was the first expression of grace from God to a human being in obedience to an unrevealed, mysterious God. There's nothing in the text that says Noah had this enduring relationship with God. No, there's no written documents at all. God just picked Noah. I need you to do something for me. The second place in the Bible is Genesis 15, verses 13 through 21. Now, let me set the stage for you. God has visited Abraham and said, I'm making you a promise. And he's like, who are you? What's this all about? Etc. He says, I need you to get up and move. So he gets up and moves. He lands in a place called Canaan. He's looking around, well, I don't know anybody around here. So God comes to him one night, and Abraham says to God, you promised me that I would have a child. I'm too old for that. And God makes a covenant with Abraham, like an old ancient covenant. And he says, go get some animals, cut them in half, etc., and I'm gonna make a legitimate earthly style covenant with you and make you a promise today. So he gets the animals, he cuts them in half, blood everywhere. It's referred to as the blood covenant. It's scattered throughout ancient history. And God said, okay. He leans him up against a tree, he's sitting down, he puts him in this trance. He said, I don't need you anymore. You got the animals ready. I'm going to make a promise to you. Listen to what he says in verses 17 and 18. And it came to pass that when the sun went down, and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land. That's the first presentation of a one-sided promise in the Bible. Abraham didn't participate in this covenant. In all ancient covenants, both parties walked down the center of that trail of blood and said, if I violate my side of this covenant, you can shed my blood. The other guy said, if I violate this covenant, you can shed my blood. No problem. But in that particular moment, God said, you create the trail of blood, and you sit over there and watch me, and I will walk down this trail of blood. If I violate this covenant, you can shed my blood. And if you violate this covenant, you can still shed my blood. And we did. We violated the covenant that God made with us. The covenant of grace, this is it right here. And we shed his blood. We just celebrated it here, right here. We glory in the fact that God kept his covenant with Abraham. Everybody in this room is a child of Abraham if you're a child of God. Grace is a one-sided gift. It is not a two-sided thing. It's a one-sided gift. A God-sided blessing where he alone imparts the gift of grace. What did you do for your salvation? I didn't do anything. He did it all. That's the whole point. That's what grace is all about. The third place in the Bible that speaks about this whole grace thing is Exodus. Let me put those guys down. First Noah, and then secondly Abraham. And third, Moses. Verse 12 to 23, just a section of it. Then Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found grace in my sight. So God tells Moses, or Moses tells God, you told me that we found grace in your sight. And God's going to respond to that now. Now therefore I pray, if I have found grace in your sight, show me now your way, that I may know and that I may find grace in your sight. And consider that this nation is your people. And he said, this is a continuation. My presence will go with you. This is God speaking. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not bring us out from here. For how will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except you go with us? So there's this little exchange between God and Moses. And he's on Mount Sinai. He's ready to get the law from God and everything else. He says, well, the only way people will know that you're gracious toward us is that you go with us. So we shall be separate, your people and I, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. So the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. And he said, please show me your glory. This is the famous section now where Moses has the audacity, show me your glory. And God says, you don't really realize what you're asking. I will make all my goodness pass before you. When we think about grace as our goodness, don't we? So we think about it. My grace is my goodness toward the people around me. And I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. This is God speaking. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. And the Lord said, here's a place by me. Here's more grace. You stand in the cleft of this rock, and I will protect you from all this glory that's going to present itself. And God says, you can't see my face. So he throws back his cloak, whatever that means, and Moses sees the back, God. It's an amazing scene. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face will not be seen. Unquote. This is the statement of God's grace, revealing himself to an unworthy human being. A person and a people he has chosen to be his own. We learn later in Deuteronomy 7, verses 6 through 9, nothing inside of Israel caused God to want to be gracious to them. He simply chose them. Old Testament grace is primarily in God's interactions with his people, Israel. But they are an obstinate bunch of turkeys. They are continuously disappointing God. They just will not live according to the covenant. They won't follow God's laws that he gave them in Mount Sinai. They just serve idols, worship other gods. They have an awful record. And God says, you know what? I need to expand this whole thing in a new kind of way. How do I get this inside these people? And the major prophets, especially Jeremiah and Ezekiel, speak to this issue powerfully. He says, behold, the days are coming, Jeremiah 31, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Jacob, not like the covenant I made with Moses, their father. When I took them out of the land of Egypt with my hand, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant of grace that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. That's a different situation. God's going to step inside of somebody and plant something in there that's not presently there. Why do I get that benefit? Where does that grace come from? It comes from God. He's going to put it inside of us, literally. I will be their God, and they shall be my people, and no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. That may be the most one-sided statement about God's grace in the entire Bible. Ezekiel pretty much just says the same thing. The New Testament is a revelation of the gracious one. Those text strings from the end of the Old Testament, just one disappointing event after the next. God's people are in captivity. They have not heard God. They have not obeyed God. They can't handle this anymore. And we come to the end of the Old Testament, and God says, it's time for the revelation of grace and truth. So Jesus showed up. And Paul then becomes the apostle that unravels God's grace. What does this stuff look like? I want to walk through Paul just for a minute. We're going to get to Romans chapter 8 eventually, so hang with me. Paul then becomes the apostle of grace, a term that he uses. owns that term 65% of the time in the New Testament. Theologians have taken the word grace and summarized it as God's riches at Christ's expense. And Paul is our teacher who plumbs the depths, and we get this definition of unmerited favor about what grace really means. But let's walk through the early history of the church and just touch on grace for a few minutes. There's some text up there. Acts 4, verse 32 through 35. Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. And with great power the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and great grace was upon them all. So grace came out of the people of God as they walked with Christ, as they stepped into the life of Christ. Grace started to pour out of them, literally. And nobody had anything but in common. So the early church had this reputation of, we're going to pool all our resources to take care of everybody who's in the mix right here. Of course, it's a very poor church in those days, sidelined by the Jewish Sanhedrin and so forth. Grace is a powerful revelation of God, and it can be a powerful attraction of the church. It can't be covered or managed. It infests believers and transforms their attitudes, their actions, and their values. The second text is Acts chapter 11. The report of this came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. When he came and saw the grace of God, Antioch was the first church plant outside of Jerusalem. So they sent Barnabas up there, and check this out. He walks into the church and goes, wow, this place is overwhelmingly gracious. The most necessary characteristic for any church to be attractive is that it be a place where people can find grace. When he came and saw the grace of God, he was glad, and he exhorted them all. So what does Barnabas do? I need to tell Saul about this. So he goes to Tarshish, where Saul is hiding, pretty much by himself. You need to come with me to this church. It's full of grace. So he brings him up to Antioch, and Saul hangs out over there and teaches for about a year. Paul was exposed to a church filled with grace. Grace is evident in the lives of Christians and is a foundation for all fruitful ministry. How do you walk away from a grace-filled church? It's really hard to do. Acts 13. Paul and Barnabas leave Cyprus and land in Antioch of Pisidia, where they minister and preach the gospel about the grace of God. It's verse 38 and 39. It says these words, "Let it be known to you, therefore, brothers, that through this man forgiveness of sin is proclaimed to you, and by him everyone who believes is free from everything from which you could be freed by the law of Moses." Grace is the good news. The law of Moses is set aside. Someone has fulfilled it for you. You need to believe in Jesus and no longer live by the law, which is an Old Testament precept. Grace is the good news of God's free salvation, and that means our sins are forgiven. The people were so moved by this good news that Paul was preaching in the synagogue in Antioch of Pisidia that they said, these things need to be told us the next Sabbath. And the meeting was set in the synagogue, and they said, we'll be back next week. Tell us more. The devout converts to Judaism followed Paul and Barnabas, who, as they spoke with them, urged them to continue in the grace of God. The great truth about grace is that it's from God, and it is the source of our deepest sense of freedom. Grace comes from the outside of me. Some people are born gracious, it seems like. But true grace comes from outside of us. It takes root inside of us, and then it can't stop to come out of us in a transformative way. Acts 15. Paul and Barnabas were sent to Jerusalem. What's going on? In Acts 15, some people come from the Jerusalem church to the church in Antioch, this place filled with grace. And they said, you know what, you guys all need to be circumcised and follow the laws of Moses. And they go, what is all of this nonsense? So they sent Paul and Barnabas and other people down to Jerusalem to discuss this matter in the first council of the church. Sirs, here's what they summarize. We believe that we will be saved through the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, just as they will. And those words came out of Peter's mouth. After the Jerusalem Council, and they said, no, those things are not necessary for salvation. Paul goes to Philippi, and a person who was a street woman who was making money for her masters was saved. And then Paul emerged from prison, and the Philippian jailer walked up to him and said, "What must I do to be saved after that earthquake?" And Paul said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved, you and your household." What does grace do? Grace opens doors. Paul was the apostle of grace. He goes back to Asia Minor for his second missionary trip, and the Spirit of God prevents him from coming into Asia Minor, but a door is open to Macedonia. So he goes across the Aegean Sea, lands in Philippi, and meets people. The little church is planted. He just walks his way down the eastern seaboard of Greece, and little churches are planted. And there's letters in the New Testament to all those churches. What does grace do? It opens doors. Finally, in Acts chapter 20, Paul declares that his calling in life was to testify to the gospel of the grace of God. And when he says goodbye to the Ephesian elders, he commends them to God's grace. Paul's writings reveal that he uses the term in all of his letters and his epistles, and he starts it with grace, he ends it with grace, and in the book of Romans he uses it the most. Go figure. Let me just summarize Romans chapter 6 through 8. I'm going to start with chapter 6. First of all, he says in chapter 6, to summarize, do not abuse grace. He says, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Because God's so gracious, he's just going to, whatever, you can just do whatever you want. No, that's just not what grace is all about. The Spirit of God inside of me actually challenges me to use the grace of God in a wise way. So don't abuse grace. Chapter 7, life without grace is really difficult. He says, the good that I would, I do not, the evil that I would not, that I do. Oh, wretched man that I am. How do you live with that internal battle going outside of us? It's pure, it's by God's grace. God's grace actually gets me through the difficult parts of life. Now, chapter 8, glory and extent of God's grace in believers. And I don't have this on your outline, but I'm just going to walk through this just for a few minutes with you. Take chapter 8, go there with me, Romans chapter 8. And look at verse 1 and 2. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free from Christ Jesus, from the law of sin and death. So first of all, in chapter 8, I am spiritually positioned under non-condemning grace. You can jot that down if you want, but come up here and take my notes if you want to listen. I am positioned under non-condemning grace. Verses 3 and 4. For God hath done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin he condemned sin in the flesh, in order that the righteous requirements of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. God frees me to walk in the Spirit. I actually have the power to walk in the Spirit because of God's grace. He gives me that grace. Verse 5. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you. Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit in him is life because of righteousness. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, He who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. I summarize that simply by saying, I can live in the Spirit because of God's grace. His grace inside of me gives me the power to live by the Spirit. Verse 12. So then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. For you do not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may be glorified with him. I have this grace from God inside of me. The Spirit of God lives inside of me and bears witness with my spirit that I'm a child of God. You ever have doubts about whether you're a child of God? I had some in my life. When I came across this, I realized that's just the devil yanking on my chain. God's Spirit bears witness with me that I'm a child of God. No matter what stupid thing I've done. The Spirit calls me into the family of God by God's grace. No. You're in the family. Come over here, Mark. Come over here. Be part of the family. Verse 18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time, and it's always about what's going on around me that disturbs my sense of peace when it comes to God's grace. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits for eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. The trees and the creation around me, so who are these people? They want to see the Spirit of God inside of them. It longs to see who we are. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. The sin that Adam committed in the garden leaks into all of creation. And creation says, we didn't cause this problem. You guys caused this problem. When will this be fixed? If creation actually had a voice that could say those words. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption of sons, the redemption of our bodies. Part of God's grace is like, I can't wait for this to be over. Strife and wars and poverty and deprivation. I just can't wait for this to be over with. So debilitating. Verse 24. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So, the Spirit of God puts inside of Mark, inside of all believers, the hope of what's coming. Doesn't depend on me, doesn't depend on really smart people who manage stuff really well. It depends on God. I like smart people. They help me out a lot. Solve all my problems, my logistical type problems and stuff like that. But in the end, it doesn't depend on any of us. God has a plan. And when that plan plays itself out, it's like, oh, it is so nice to be through that mess we were in. Verse 26. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses. Now, there's issues outside of me that I have no control over, and then there's the issues inside of me. He said, the Spirit of God helps me in my weaknesses. Oh, that's good. For we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is in the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. So, in the midst of my personal mess, the Spirit of God says, I'm praying for you, Mark. I'm lifting up your personal needs. You don't even know how to vocalize those things, but God knows what's going on. And the Spirit of God prays for me. If you don't pray for me, then my siblings don't pray for me, my former church families don't pray for me, I know one person who does. Spirit of God. Verse 28. This is an important verse. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. Am I clicking down here properly? No, I'm not. Sorry. Every step from right now to eternity is laid out by God. Yes, everything nailed. No concerns. He's going to make sure that I arrive where I'm supposed to be when that time comes. That's what God's going to do. He covers every step of redemption. Verse 31. What then shall we say of these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? I think I mentioned this before. One day my brother just called me. He's driving his truck. He goes, Mark, we are so blessed. I think, where does all this come from? He says, I've just been pondering that verse in Romans chapter 8, verse 31. If God is for us, what army could be against us? He was just kind of processing that whole thing in his mind. Just being encouraged. Want to encourage you. See you later. If God is for us, who can be against us? That's just pure grace. Pure grace. Look at verse 33. Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? I was ungodly. I deserved hell itself, hands down, and God graciously saved me. I don't really know why. I just did. He just did. He justifies the ungodly. Paul says, I was the chief amongst sinners. He got it. Verse 34. We're almost done with this chapter. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, he was raised. He was at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. And finally, verse 35 through the end, which are verses you may have memorized. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Now in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of Christ. The love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. God's love is grace, and his grace in action towards us. Let me draw a conclusion. Head grace is clearly understanding what God has done for me and mentally processing what that means. That's what it means. So that's head grace. We spend most of our time talking about head grace. The Word of God is packed full of head grace. But the best part is heart grace, and I'm coming to that. And I just like this little section of the message the most. I finished the first section and thought, what am I going to do to finish this thing up? And God said, Mark, what about heart grace? So, heart grace is how grace affects me experientially. Now, we're all pretty high-end, educated people in here, so this whole experience thing is like feet touching nonsense. But this is really, Jesus was full of grace and truth. So he knew exactly the balance that needs to be in our lives in this regard. The Old Testament unpacks grace, Paul unpacks grace and everything else, but Jesus gets to the heart of this issue with a story. In Luke chapter 15, there's 3 stories. The first one's about a lost sheep. There's 100 sheep, one of them's lost. And he puts the 99 in a safe place and goes and finds the one sheep. And heaven rejoices that he's found. The second story is a woman who has 10 coins, and she loses one of them. And she scours the house, tears the whole place apart, and finally finds the coin. And everyone just rejoices with her, and she has a big party at her house. But the third story, about a lost son, flips everybody on their wig. Boom, what's going on? This is crazy. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are leaning in on the first 2 stories. Yeah. But when he told the third story, they're like, that's outrageous. Let's take a quick look at it. It's about a lost son. A man had 2 sons. The younger dishonors his father, says to him, I want my inheritance now. Which, in the vernacular, is, I wish you were dead so I get my money. That's what it boils down to. That's what he was saying. I wish you were just dead. Give me my money. So the father has to sell land and all that stuff and give the kid whatever he's got coming to him. I don't know if he gave him half the estate or whatever, but the kid takes all the money and heads to the hills with his friends. They blow all the money, living crazy, spending, just wasting their money. And the father's grieved. And the son says to himself, in the midst of a pig pen where he's working, trying to keep life and limb together, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father. So he gets up. He's thinking, does my father have any grace in his eyes for his son? He's coming down the road. He's a trash mess. And somehow the father hears from someone in town, your son's coming up the road. He heads through town running, which is completely contrary to Middle Eastern ways. Fathers would never run towards their sons. They would stand still and wait for their son back to him. He goes to his son, meets him on the road. And the son has this little prepared speech. Father, I have sinned against you. I'm not worthy to be one of your servants. Can I just be one of your servants so I have something to eat? And he cuts him off, basically. And he says, the father says to the older son, who's really incensed by all this nonsense, it was fitting to celebrate and be glad. This your brother was dead and is now alive. He was lost and is now found. I have a painting in my office, which is dear to my heart. It's Rembrandt's Return to the Prodigal. It could be one of the greatest paintings that's ever been put on canvas. But Rembrandt spent years toying with this story. He just runs in his head over and over. How can I paint this? So he paints a very interesting painting, which is packed full of questions, statements. Now, there's 5 characters in the painting, and in the story that we have right here, there's only 3. So he puts 2 people in the painting that are not part of the story, but they could easily be part of the story. The central figure in the story is the father, and he's the gracious one. He has the most gracious hands on the back of his son that you've ever seen. His face is the only face that's completely exposed. Because when God's grace comes to us, he is completely exposed. He gives everything to open the door of grace to us. He's the central figure in the painting. And his son, the father's a wealthy landowner who has been verbally challenged by this wicked kid who just is ungrateful, runs off and spends all that money, and now he's back. He's trashed. One of his shoes is missing. He's in rags. And the one face you cannot see is the son's. He is absolutely bowed in shame and disgrace. And I think Rembrandt will say, you know what? We are all this runaway son. We need the grace of God in our life. We need God's grace in our life. We need to be the recipient of overwhelming grace, one who is wrapped in shame and rags, with our bodies bowed low. He's the only person in the painting who's on his knees. The Father's bent over him, and his face is worn with the weariness. What happened to this kid? But there's three more people in the painting. The person standing the tallest is the oldest son, and he's an interesting character. He thinks that grace should be limited. He's got his arms crossed. You can see part of his face. He's thinking to himself, this is not right. His conversation with his father was, I've been a faithful servant to you, a son to you, my whole life, and you have never given me a party. His father said, everything I have is yours. He's just an ingrate. He thinks that grace ought to be limited. Because I lived an upright life. Those people don't deserve more. That stupid brother of mine who wasted half the estate, get him out of here. Grace is done with him. He's definitely the guy with the look on his face like, nope, this is not right. There's two more characters. Those are the three characters who are in the story. There's two more characters that Rembrandt inserts into the picture, and I think he inserted them just for me. Okay. There's a woman. This person's the furthest away from the actual scene. The older brother's literally right there. But behind the father is probably a woman who's the boy's mother. And she was probably there when the younger son said to his father, I want my money, I wish you were dead. And look, her face is really clouded, barely see her. But she's standing back, and shamed by the foolishness of her son's words, the choices that he made. And her face is the hardest to read, puzzled by her husband's overwhelming statement of grace. Glad that her son's back in good graces, but scratching her like, what do we do now? And sometimes when God receives people into his grace, Paul's life illustrates this perfectly. When he came to Christ, no one believed God had changed him. It took years for him to be accepted by the church, because his life before Christ was so messed up. There's one more person in the picture, and there's a lot of speculation about who this character is, but it's, I think, the manager of the man's estate. You know, I doubt very much that the father sold the land and gave half money away. He told his manager to do it. I owe my son X number of dollars, sell some stuff and give it to him. So the manager did all the paperwork, and he's the guy sitting down. And he's thinking to himself, okay, what's going to happen now? How are we going to divide this whole estate up? But whatever's left over belongs to the oldest son. And he thinks that grace can run out. You can mess it up so bad that there's no more grace. That painting speaks to me so powerfully. Praise God for grace that is bottomless. You can't maximize grace in your life and then end up with no more grace from God. It's endless, and God's heart is overflowing grace. So let me draw a simple summary We understand grace in our head, but until we experience it in our hearts, we really don't know what it means to know God. We will never really know the heart of God. We will never really share the grace of God with the lost soul. When you experience God's grace, it can't stop coming out. Let's pray. Father, your redeeming grace has saved me, called me, cared for me, and spoke in me and through me. And it's still a puzzle to understand all of your grace. I pray, Lord, as we go through the song and then go on our gracious way, you will manifest your grace in us this week. I pray that some of your grace will leak out of us, the people around us. We will ask you to balance our truth with the grace that's in your life. Thank you that the grace in your eyes was lighted upon me, upon us, and make us gracious people, a gracious church, people who just languish in your grace. I see myself as the prodigal. I see myself as the older brother. I see myself as the mother. I see myself as the manager in that painting. Help me to momentarily this week see myself in position to hold the gracious one. Open our hearts to your grace. Some here without Christ, I pray that today they will sense the grace that's in your eyes towards them. We pray in Christ's name.